fund managers, advisors, and public companies, these three entities have major catching up to do in terms of user engagement in this digital world. We have just the savior for them, a man whose mission in life is for clients to feel inclusive. We have a super friendly CEO, 4 in 360, Mr. Rowland Hirst. Give a big round of applause for Mr. Hirst.
Thanks for that introduction. It's lovely. Nice to spend some time with you. The purpose of my talk today is about showcasing the value proposition of active management. A little bit about, and really I wanted to focus on the importance of measurement. And I think hopefully through the course of our time together that will sort of emerge for you as a way to, as a key point to think about as well. A little bit about me, apart from being this sort of laconic Australian standing up on stage here. I'm a 20-year veteran of financial services, during which a lot of that time was to take large listed companies and fund managers around the US and Canada to meet with their stakeholders, particularly investors. And developed this kernel of an idea some years ago that really came home to me through that process. One, that I felt that getting on an aeroplane and flying from one location to the next involved a lot of downtime, and I think you all experienced that, the amount of downtime you spend and not being in front of your client. The second part is the feedback loop. So the challenge I put to you is that if your value proposition is a human one, which active managers do have, then how are you measuring it? And that's what we're going to focus on today. So it was while I was preparing another bit of feedback back to a company which is highly subjective and some of it frankly made up, which is the normal, which is the standard within the industry, that I read an article from Bill Gates back in 2014 in the New York Times about the importance of measurement. And he talks about it in terms of improving the outcome of disease within developing markets, and also lifting people above the poverty line. But as I was writing this piece of feedback, I said, look, there's a lot in the developed world that we are still missing, and particularly in my industry, which is the active management, in terms of measuring how well we are engaging our stakeholders. Right, let's see if this works. So what is the value proposition of active management? Look at Fidelity's front page. They'll tell you it's all about personal relationship between them and you, the client. Invesco focuses on team and addressing the needs of clients. Oaktree focuses on team and says in that bottom paragraph that their core business principle is to invest with common interest with their clients and a collaborative approach. This is important because their human value proposition is valued by their investors. Trusted managers raise up to 4 times as much money as managers who just focus on putting up performance. That's research done by Chestnut Advisory Group out of the US. I don't think I'm telling you something you don't already know, particularly if you're in this industry. The anecdotes are pretty clear around the world that it's people who build relationships win assets under management. Let's look at companies. Microsoft. One of the key things is earning trust from their stakeholders and active engagement with their stakeholders. Nestle will even tell you about their intensive engagement with their shareholders. You may have missed this last year, but the Business Roundtable, which is headed up by Jamie Dimon, is the representative body of the S&P 500 companies. In August last year, they demoted the importance of the stockholder to the same level as all stakeholders. What does that mean? More engagement on different subjects, not just about how much money we're going to make you. Again, that point I make, hopefully you can see it down the bottom, but research done by Towers Watson shows that great communicators from companies, their TSR outperforms companies who are poor communicators by nearly 50%. So we've discussed the human value proposition. So how's it been promoted? I've drafted this into analog channels and digital channels, and then ranked it from what would be broadcasting down to more of a communication technique. So as you can see, the traditional way of doing things, particularly from an active fund manager's perspective, is to send out investment letters, fact sheets, market releases from a listed company, or to send those letters on to an intermediary who might be a financial advisor or a broker. Not really human, is it? Audio calls. Not really human, because all we're hearing is your voice. We're not actually seeing you. We're not engaging. They'll go on conferences and roadshows, which is great because it's a face-to-face meeting. But again, it's not that scalable. Meet the manager experiences are where financial intermediaries host portfolio managers. Again, great because it's a two-way communication face-to-face, but again, difficult to scale. And then the one-on-one meeting, and nothing beats building relationships than the one-on-one meeting. I think that's pretty clear to everyone. Digital, we've seen effectively trading platforms, information services are effectively those investment letters going digital. Webcasts and webinars. Webcasts is just broadcasting. Webinars are like me talking to you for half an hour and then asking for questions. They're trying to do that digitally. And if you're trying to retain your stakeholder in a digital environment for 40 to 45 minutes and sometimes an hour and a half before you take a question from them, put yourself in their shoes. Are they really going to sit around for an hour and a half from their mobile phone before they get their question addressed? Podcasts and on-demand videos are coming up, difficult to measure. Social media, starting to see more usage of social media. Again, the measurement tools there are not really that focused on human. Online surveys and video conferencing, which is a one-on-one digital solution. So what's the best method for active managers to show human connection? And we've applied a measurement score to them. Down the bottom, hopefully you can read it. If you get a 0, you do nothing of this. 1 is that you can measure attendance or how many people have read it. 2 is that you can do that, plus there's a feedback loop opportunity. 3 is you can do all of that, plus you can measure behaviour. And then 4 is pretty much everything that's missing. That is tracking network behaviour, benchmarking your ability to engage versus your peers, enabling your stakeholders to set the agenda, enabling them a pathway to go to fulfilment, I invest in your product, and to seek advice from the intermediary, the financial advisor. So there are the scores in terms of how human the connection is, and then the measure. What other opportunities are we missing with traditional ways of engagement? Leveraging time. What's a good use of your time? How can I leverage that value proposition into more people? So ticks are high leverage, crosses are low leverage. Carbon footprint. By hopping on an aeroplane and going to visit clients, what's your carbon footprint versus doing a video conferencing solution? How much are you advocating, particularly if you're an ESG manager, how much are you advocating that? To what extent, I should say, sorry. Conflict risk. What we'll talk about shortly is the work that's been done by regulators to remove conflicts from intermediaries, such along the lines of financial incentives given by active managers for financial advisors to go and sell their product for them. And so we'll talk about that briefly. And there you can see the outcomes for conflict risk. What's this led to? We have a customer experience in wealth management that's well documented that it's documented that it's well behind the curve of a customer's experience in other industries. It's research from Ernst & Young. We are paying the fund flow. Last year in August, the amount of funds in passive options in the US finally surpassed active options in the US, and there's no stopping that trend. It will continue. Regulatory disruption, I briefly touched on that earlier, but you've seen in the UK that the UK banned trailing commissions back in 2013. Australia did something similar and then moved to ban grandfathered commissions. this year. Singapore has cut sales commissions on their products. Canada, the CSA has banned commissions on some mutual funds. And in the US, the Department of Labor tried to raise the level of responsibility of a financial analyst to one of fiduciary responsibility, where they'd have to disclose all conflicts. But what's been driven in the US is, rather than being regulatory, the consumers are very much demanding that conflicts are disclosed. And then for listed companies, the emergence of MiFID II, when it started last year, while it's not all encompassing of MiFID II, there are a lot of parts to it. One of the areas was that prior to January last year, a fund manager used to be able to tap the fund for the amount of money that it would pay to sell side, to brokers and the like for such things as corporate access. That has now changed, where you need an implicit agreement from all of your fund investors before you can do that. And so the outcome that's, by fund managers is that they are essentially not paying the sell side anymore to the extent that they were for those types of resources, and going more direct to companies themselves. And then the rise of ESG. It was first coined in 2005, and Forbes now states that more than 25% of the managed pool of assets in the world has an ESG bias. How does it look for the investor, the end beneficiary of this? Simple fact is if you look across the three biggest investments you make in your own household through your life, which is your house, your health, and then your wealth, ask yourself what the network of relationships is like in each of those three different areas. And I'm sure you'd agree with me that within wealth, it's the weakest. And so the traditional way of doing things has led to this situation where we feel like in wealth we do not have the same network of relationships that we do in other parts of our life. And that's where it's come to. But that also creates opportunity, an opportunity for fintechs in particular. And there is no better time since the introduction of the internet to be thinking about an idea within active management, within wealth management, and then helping the incumbents adapt to the regulatory disruption that's ongoing, the rise of ESG, and the trying to improve the network of relationships for an individual. And so what backs up my argument? Cloud platforms like Azure make it easy for companies like ours to collaborate with the incumbents without having any impact on their IT infrastructure. In 2017, July of 2017, Safari was the last major browser to adopt WebRTC, or to accept it, which means that communications can now occur without having to download anything. And in financial services, behind firewalls, that has been a particularly difficult hurdle to get over. But since about July 2017, that problem is fast going away. And we're seeing the stories about the adoption of 5G. While on average you can get 30 megabytes a second out of 4G, your low point's about 2. So you do get dropouts in the meetings. When 5G comes in, your minimum is 100 megs a second. So the ability to communicate virtually, and those issues of dropouts and the like are going away with the introduction of 5G. Measurement. Lord Kelvin said if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So the emergence of computational science. I went to MIT after I finished investment banking. Started working with a guy it's called Sandy Pentland, who's a pioneer of computational science and behavioural science. And essentially the data that we've collected on each other over the last decade to 15 years puts us in a much better position to measure how we behave as a group. So the opportunity to improve measurement is emerging as well. Advice. It's not just about reducing the conflicts in terms of financial incentive. As part of the regulatory disruption, it's also about how you look after your clients' needs. So prior to a lot of the disruption was you just had to find a product that was suitable. Now you have to find a product that's in their best interest. So you actually have to understand your client's interests a lot more. And we're seeing the emergence, well, not just the emergence, we initially saw robo-advice emerge, which then became more like hybrid advice, where it was actually, the adoption by Morgan Stanley and the like is more like, what can we find out about our client before we get to that discussion about what product suits them using robo techniques. And then fulfillment and records. The onboarding process within financial services is pretty well documented, but as you can see, Thomson Reuters puts it at 26 days, sometimes 32 for corporates. The way that an individual would invest to get to the fund product would cost them 3.5% to 5% by the time they pay their financial advisor a fee, by the time they pay the platform a fee that the advisor's buying that off, by the time they pay the management fee of the active manager, and then also incorporated in that is the fee that the supermarket charges the active manager. So there's a great opportunity, we believe, over the next 5 to 10 years to disrupt that channel of how someone could invest and how people can onboard with financial service providers. Oop, did I press the wrong button there? I did, sorry. I highlighted where regulatory disruption's underway and the opportunity for that. This is just for our business. This isn't the opportunity across the board. But we don't single out those 7 jurisdictions just because that's just where we want to work. We single out those 7 jurisdictions because that's where the net demand is, as we see it, is most critical for active managers to adapt and to change based on the regulatory disruption that's gone on. And for us, it's an $8.5 billion Australian dollar, or about $6 billion US dollar opportunity, looking across those facets across the jurisdictions. The emergence of ESG. It's not just about, you'd be familiar with the story last year, how Prince Harry went around preaching about environmental concerns travelling on private air jets. It's not just about the questions. It's not just about preaching your strategy, it's what you're doing in your own backyard. And that's becoming more and more a focus. So what are you doing as active managers who preach ESG? What are you doing about your own travel? What are you doing about moving your IT off servers and into the cloud? A meeting here in Dubai, a meeting using our solution is no more than 7% of the carbon footprint of a meeting here in Dubai. That's before we even get on a jet and fly around to meet someone else. So there's an advocacy component. If you are in the business of ESG, then be in the business of ESG. Social, of course, means that there are just more topics to talk about than how much money you're making me. What are you doing for your community? What are you doing about diversity and governance? Nothing says good governance than I'm available to my stakeholders through the year via a meeting. Finally, a plug for us, because that's what I want to do. So we're in the business of group virtual meetings. That experience where you walk into a room, 50 people, 500 people, and handing the agenda over to your stakeholders. And then in that environment, virtual environment, far more data rich to measure your behaviour, and by giving people the opportunity to set the agenda, ask their question, have it answered, give their feedback, and then potentially go on to invest or seek advice, then we're just collecting a lot more information about that individual. And because it's standardised, it also means that we can give back to the active manager metrics about what people are asking management teams. What are the most impactful answers, positive and negative? What works index? What doesn't work index? And then benchmarking. How well are you engaging your stakeholders relative to your peer group? Finally, we get measurement tools on the most important part of active management, your relationship. Multi-channel distribution, that's actually very respectful of the way that funds and companies distribute their message through intermediaries. We don't disrupt that. We very much embrace it and believe that by embracing it, that the identity of a company's clients stays with that company. So you can co-brand an event through your distribution partners, where they brand it where they can send it to their clients or to their financial advisors as their brand featuring the asset manager's product. The neutral meeting place. We conduct a lot of meetings. Another channel for these meetings is a neutral meeting place. It looks just like Netflix. Free for investors, free for advisors, where rather than booking videos or movies, you can come and seek an opportunity to meet with a potential manager of your money, whether that be a fund or a company. And then finally, over 5 to 10 years, our vision is very much that as a company, that the future of financial services is a series of direct relationships. I have a relationship with my financial advisor. That financial advisor recommends a product to me that's in my best interest. I then have a relationship with that product provider. And so a digital passport would make that process a lot easier to navigate, where the passport just retains my record and I use that passport to pre-fill the application forms of different experts that I want to engage with. And that's us. That's the plug. I thank you for your time, and that's how you can contact us. And any questions about that?
Thank you for sharing. It's been a quite insightful presentation. I love your point about the ESG development and really walking the walk, not only talking the talk. Could you just share, like, what do you see geographically from MENA perspective and, South Asia versus the developed countries like the USA and, everybody's developed, but from the mentality and adoption of the ESG, and then where do you see the shift going in 2020 and beyond?
Yeah, so we think about it as in terms of which managers are really walking the walk and talking the talk. And you need to think about that because our client base operate in multi-jurisdictions. They're around the world, so they'll adopt that strategy for all of their offices. To sort of answer your question more specifically, certainly what we're seeing that a lot of the lead has been taken by European-based asset managers on ESG. In the US, from my experience, that they're not as rigorous about walking the walk as yet, but they're still trying. They have other issues in terms of engagement, which is not so ESG related. That is, they're bleeding assets to passive management. And they realise now that the investment letter is not a great way to build to showcase that human value proposition. So I think you just need to be careful about the big issue here, which is showcasing human value proposition and then leading in ESG. Now, the way I would probably better answer that question from our perspective in terms of who we're relating with is that the European managers, their portfolio managers at the product level are in Paris, Rotterdam, London. Their client base is global. And so if they are walking the walk, for them to get on an aeroplane and fly down to Singapore or to fly to Dubai and then go around their intermediary networks for meetings, if you are preaching ESG, you are inevitably going to get the question in the meeting, why'd you get on an aeroplane? And what are you doing as an organisation to walk the walk? So I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. My question is, I think it was interesting that you mentioned that the user experience, the digital user experience in the asset management is lagging behind other industries. Could you elaborate on that, and have there been any breakthroughs that you've seen in catching up?
Yeah, so it comes back to this point. See if we can find it here. where you are as an individual, how do you feel? And that was where the survey was taken by Ernst & Young. That in terms of what are you paying for with an active management? Why do you pay 7 times as much money for someone who's not really delivering you that much better performance than a passive solution? And the sales pitch would go from an active manager, well, it's my discipline as a portfolio manager, my very smart team of analysts over here. And unlike passive, where you're on your own, we're here for you. But the way of showcasing in the past that we're here for you is, well, here's your letter, or here's your fact sheet. And so the experience from a consumer's perspective is, well, what you're pitching is not what I'm experiencing. And by virtue of that deficit, I get in other industries an experience that's more closely aligned to the pitch that's presented to me. Does that make sense? So where my disappointment in what's going on in wealth and active is greater than what I see elsewhere. And it's not just limited to Ernst & Young. You can read Accenture's research, and certainly robo-advice and others would use this as in their marketing pitches for why we need to change the nature of that. In terms of breakthroughs and success, yes, particularly in the underbanked market, Stash Invest is I keep an eye on it. Some old colleagues of mine are running that in the US. They're trying to cater for the 100 odd million Americans who are underbanked. So offering simple solutions for people who never really had access to any sort of advice or any sort of savings solution before. They're a breakthrough there. In what we're seeing further up the channel is really just the move from trying to do these meet the manager events in person, and particularly I think it comes back to an earlier question, certainly in the US in particular, you remember there are 311,000 financial advisors, intermediaries who sit between the asset manager and that end user. They're not even getting to see portfolio managers. And we're working with 5 or 6 of the largest asset managers in the world, and that's a problem that they recognise. Sorry, I think I've answered your question a long way around. Hopefully I answered it well.
We'll take one last question before we end the session. Anybody for one last question? All right, I think we're good to go. Thank you so much. A big round of applause for Mr. Hirst.
Thanks for sharing your time with me. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Hirst.